The last person my son wished a happy Mother's Day wasn't me. It wasn't because he forgot. It wasn't because we had argued. It was because someone had quietly convinced him that another woman deserved my place more than I did. I didn't realize it until I saw the photograph that everyone else had already seen. My son was smiling with the kind of smile I hadn't received in years, his arm around his wife, another bouquet resting in the hands of her mother, while my phone remained silent on the kitchen table. I told myself there had to be a reason. Then I noticed something that made my heart sink even deeper. Every comment praised what a devoted family they were, yet not a single person asked where I was. That was the moment I understood something terrifying. You don't lose your child all at once. You lose them one ordinary day at a time, until one morning you wake up and realize someone else has quietly rewritten your place in their life. I didn't cry. I didn't call. I simply stared at that picture until the coffee beside me turned cold, wondering when I had become invisible. Looking back now, I can tell you it didn't begin with a fight. It didn't begin with shouting or slammed doors. It began with kindness, or at least what looked like kindness. My name is Eleanor Brooks, and I was 68 years old when I finally admitted that I no longer recognized the relationship between my son and me. Daniel had always been the center of my world. After my husband passed away nearly 12 years earlier, I poured everything I had into helping my son build the life his father would have wanted for him. I never expected repayment. I never expected grand gestures. I only hoped that no matter how busy life became, there would always be room for his mother somewhere in his heart. When Daniel married Ashley 6 years ago, I truly believed I had gained another daughter. She was charming, thoughtful, and endlessly polite. She remembered birthdays, sent handwritten thank you cards, and always hugged me before leaving family dinners. Friends told me how lucky I was to have such a wonderful daughter-in-law. I believed them because I wanted to. The changes came so slowly that I almost felt guilty for noticing them. Sunday dinners became monthly dinners. Monthly dinners became holiday lunches. Holiday lunches became quick coffee dates that were canceled more often than they happened. Every explanation sounded perfectly reasonable. Daniel had a demanding career. Ashley had commitments with her own family. The grandchildren would understand when they were older. Life was simply busy. That's what I repeated every time another invitation disappeared or another phone call ended after only 3 minutes. Whenever I hesitated, Ashley would smile warmly and squeeze my hand. "We're just trying to balance everyone's expectations, Eleanor," she'd say so gently that questioning her felt unfair. Daniel would nod beside her, grateful that someone had explained what he never seemed able to say himself. I kept accepting those explanations because mothers become experts at making excuses for the people they love. We tell ourselves they're tired, stressed, overwhelmed, or distracted. We rarely allow ourselves to believe that we've simply stopped being a priority. It took years before I realized that every little compromise I made had quietly created a space where someone else could step into the role I once held without anyone noticing it was happening. I wish I could tell you there was one unforgettable moment when everything changed, one cruel sentence or one dramatic argument that divided us forever. The truth was much quieter than that, and somehow it hurt even more. Ashley never demanded that Daniel choose between his wife and his mother. She simply became the answer to every question before I ever had the chance to speak. If Daniel wondered where to spend Thanksgiving, Ashley already had plans. If Christmas morning came around, her parents had started a tradition that everyone was expected to respect. If I suggested Sunday dinner, she would smile warmly and explain that the children needed quiet weekends at home. There was always a reasonable explanation. There was always another weekend. There was always next month. At first I admired how organized she was. She kept a beautiful calendar on the refrigerator covered with color-coded notes and family activities. Daniel often laughed that he would forget his own birthday without Ashley keeping everything together. I laughed with him because I wanted to be supportive. I even complimented her on how well she managed their busy lives. Looking back, I realize I slowly handed over every family tradition without even noticing. One by one, the rituals that had connected Daniel and me quietly disappeared. Every autumn, we had always driven through the countryside to admire the changing leaves. It was something we started when he was 7 years old because we could never afford expensive vacations. We packed peanut butter sandwiches, hot apple cider in a thermos, and spent the entire Saturday driving winding roads while talking about school, dreams, and whatever happened to be on his mind. One October I called to ask if he wanted to continue the tradition. He sounded hesitant before saying Ashley had already booked a pumpkin festival with her family. Maybe next year, Mom. Next year never came. Then there were the little phone calls. Daniel used to call every Wednesday evening during his drive home from work. Sometimes we talked for 30 minutes. Sometimes only 5. It did not matter because hearing his voice always brightened my week. Gradually those calls became texts. The texts became short replies with smiling face emojis. Eventually several Wednesdays passed without anything at all. Whenever I reached out, Ashley would often answer instead. She would say Daniel had fallen asleep early, was finishing an important project, or had promised the children a movie night. Her messages were always cheerful and considerate. I even thanked her for keeping me updated. It never crossed my mind that I was no longer hearing directly from my own son. Friends would ask how Daniel was doing, and I found myself repeating things Ashley had told me because I honestly did not know anymore. She had quietly become the narrator of my son's life, while I listened from the audience like everyone else. The most painful part was not the distance itself. It was how natural it all seemed. Nobody accused me of being unwelcome. Nobody slammed a door in my face. Instead, I was gently moved farther and farther from the center until I became an occasional visitor in a family that I had once believed would always have room for me. I kept telling myself this was simply how families changed as children grew older. I repeated that comforting thought so many times that I almost believed it. Almost. I stopped asking questions because I had grown tired of hearing answers that sounded perfectly reasonable. Instead, I started paying attention to the things nobody thought I would notice. It began with photographs. Every few weeks Daniel posted another smiling family picture online. There they were at the county fair, at the beach, at birthday dinners, at school concerts, at neighborhood barbecues, at Christmas tree farms, and on weekend road trips. I smiled at every picture because that was what mothers were supposed to do. Then one afternoon I realized something that left me staring at my screen much longer than I wanted to admit. I had not been invited to a single one of those moments. Not one. I tried convincing myself that social media never showed the whole story. Perhaps they had simply forgotten to post the days we spent together. Then I opened my own photo album on my phone. The newest picture of Daniel and me together was nearly 11 months old. We were standing outside my favorite diner after breakfast, both wearing light jackets against the cool spring air. I remembered how rushed he had seemed that morning. He kept checking his watch, saying Ashley needed him home before noon because her parents were stopping by. At the time I thought nothing of it. Now I noticed it had quietly become our last photograph together. A few days later I visited the grocery store where I had shopped for almost 20 years. As I walked through the produce section, someone called my name. It was an old neighbor, Linda, who had known Daniel since he was a little boy riding his bicycle around the neighborhood. She smiled warmly and asked, "How was your grandson's school play last Friday?" Daniel said the children were wonderful. I felt my smile freeze. I had no idea there had even been a school play. I answered as casually as I could, saying I had not been able to attend. Linda nodded politely and continued shopping, never realizing she had exposed a truth that my own son had never mentioned. I drove home with both hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. I replayed the conversation over and over, searching for an explanation that would make it hurt less. Perhaps Daniel assumed Ashley had invited me. Perhaps the invitation had been lost. Perhaps there had been a misunderstanding. Mothers become incredibly creative when protecting their children from blame. That evening I looked through old birthday cards Daniel had made as a child. One card, covered in crooked blue letters and uneven hearts, read, "My mom comes to everything because she loves me the most." I sat quietly at my kitchen table holding that card while the house settled around me with its familiar evening sounds. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped coming to everything because nobody had told me where everything was happening. The realization did not arrive like lightning. It settled over me as gently as falling snow, covering every memory with a different meaning. I was no longer missing family events because life was busy. I was missing them because I had quietly disappeared from the list of people who were expected to be there. The most painful part was knowing that Daniel probably believed this had happened naturally, while someone else had been carefully arranging the distance one ordinary decision at a time. I could have filled a room with everything I had given my son over the years, but none of those sacrifices had ever felt like burdens at the time. They simply felt like what a mother does. After my husband passed away, the silence inside our little house was almost unbearable, but I never allowed Daniel to carry that weight. He was only 29 then, standing at the beginning of his own future, and I promised myself that grief would never become an anchor tied to his dreams. I sold the second family car because I no longer needed it, and the money helped him make the down payment on his first home. I quietly postponed replacing my aging roof because he needed help covering unexpected moving expenses. When his company downsized during an economic slowdown, I mailed him grocery store gift cards every week without signing my name because I knew he would refuse them if he realized they came from me. Years later, he confessed that those anonymous cards had carried his family through one of the hardest seasons of his life. I only smiled and changed the subject because mothers do not keep score. I still remembered the nights when he was 8 years old and terrified of thunderstorms. He would climb into my bed carrying his favorite blue blanket, convinced that every clap of thunder meant the world was ending. I would sit beside him until sunrise if that was what he needed. I remembered teaching him how to drive in an empty church parking lot on quiet Saturday mornings, both of us laughing every time he accidentally pressed the brake too hard. I remembered cheering louder than anyone else when he graduated from college, even though my hands ached from working double shifts all week. Every memory reminded me that love is rarely built through grand moments. It grows through thousands of ordinary acts that almost nobody remembers except the person who gave them. Ashley had entered Daniel's life years after those chapters were written, and I never expected her to compete with them. I believed there was enough room in one heart for both a wife and a mother. That belief comforted me until I noticed something I had never questioned before. Whenever Daniel spoke about difficult moments from his childhood, the stories slowly began changing. Instead of saying, "Mom always figured things out," he would smile at Ashley and say, "You taught me how important family traditions are." When he thanked someone for encouraging him to pursue promotions at work, he looked toward her instead of remembering the countless evenings I had spent convincing him not to give up after another rejection. They were small details, almost invisible to anyone else, but each one felt like another page quietly removed from the story of our family. I wondered whether memories could actually be rewritten if enough time passed. Perhaps they could. Or perhaps people simply remembered the voices they heard most often. I did not blame Ashley completely because Daniel was a grown man making his own choices. Yet I could not ignore the quiet sadness growing inside me. The foundation of our relationship had not collapsed overnight. It had been slowly covered by new conversations, new routines, and new versions of the past, until the woman who had built those memories no longer seemed essential to the story. Sitting alone in my living room that evening, I looked at an old family photograph on the mantel and realized something I had never considered before. Sometimes the greatest fear of growing older is not being forgotten by strangers. It is watching the people you love slowly forget the journey that brought all of you together. I still believe that if I remained patient, everything would eventually find its way back to normal. Families go through busy seasons, I reminded myself. Children grow up. Grandchildren have activities. Young couples build traditions of their own. Those were healthy changes and I wanted to respect them. Then came my granddaughter Emily's 8th birthday party. The afternoon that quietly changed the way I saw everything. Ashley had called a week earlier with her usual cheerful voice. She said they would love for me to come if I had time because Emily would be thrilled to see Grandma. I smiled the entire day after that phone call. I drove to my favorite bakery before sunrise to order Emily's favorite vanilla cake with fresh strawberries, even though Ashley had already arranged the main dessert. I bought a watercolor painting set because Emily had once spent an afternoon painting flowers with me at my kitchen table, proudly declaring that she wanted to become an artist someday. I wrapped the gift carefully with lavender ribbon, because that had always been her favorite color. When I arrived, the backyard was already full of laughter. Children ran across the lawn chasing bubbles while parents gathered beneath a large shade tent with paper plates and iced tea. Ashley greeted me with a warm smile and thanked me for coming. Everything seemed perfectly pleasant. I relaxed. For a little while, I convinced myself that perhaps I had imagined the growing distance. Then I noticed where everyone was sitting. Ashley's parents occupied the seats beside Daniel at the main table. They laughed together as if they had shared that place for years. When another guest asked whether anyone was using the empty chair near Daniel, Ashley quietly placed her purse on it before answering that someone else might need it later. I found a small folding chair near the edge of the yard beside neighbors I had never met. Nobody had intentionally sent me there. Nobody had spoken an unkind word. Yet somehow I had been placed outside the circle without anyone needing to explain why. During lunch, one of Ashley's coworkers walked over carrying a drink and smiled politely. She looked at me for a moment before asking, "So how do you know the family?" I laughed softly because I assumed she was joking. She was not. Before I could answer, Ashley stepped over and said with a pleasant smile, "This is Eleanor. She is Daniel's relative." Relative. The word landed more heavily than I expected. Not his mother. Not Emily's grandmother. Simply a relative. Ashley moved on to greet another guest without realizing she had left those words hanging in the air. The coworker smiled apologetically and continued the conversation, unaware that my heart had just become much heavier than the gift resting beside my chair. I glanced toward Daniel, expecting him to correct the introduction. He was helping Emily open presents, laughing as wrapping paper covered the grass. Either he had not heard it or he had heard it so often that it no longer sounded unusual. I sat quietly through the rest of the afternoon, smiling whenever Emily ran over to hug me, clapping when she blew out her candles, and thanking everyone for including me. But as I drove home with the empty gift bag folded neatly on the passenger seat, one thought refused to leave me. You can lose your place in someone's life so gradually that even the people closest to you stop remembering what your place was supposed to be. I did not tell Daniel what had happened at the birthday party, because I was no longer certain he would understand why it mattered. To him, it might have sounded like a harmless misunderstanding. To me, it felt like another thread quietly pulled from the fabric of our family, until I barely recognized what remained. A week later, my oldest friend, Margaret Collins, invited me to lunch at the little cafe where we had been meeting almost every month since our husbands were still alive. Margaret had the rare gift of listening without interrupting, and somehow she always knew when I was carrying more than I admitted. We spoke about gardening, rising grocery prices, and her new puppy before she finally looked at me across the table and asked, "How long have you been pretending that everything is fine?" I smiled out of habit. She did not smile back. "Eleanor," she said gently, "you have become very good at protecting everyone except yourself." Those words settled heavily between us. For the first time in years, I stopped defending the situation. I quietly told her about the missed invitations, the unanswered phone calls, the family photographs, and the introduction that had reduced me to nothing more than a relative. Margaret listened without once interrupting. When I finished, she stirred her coffee slowly before speaking. "I have heard Ashley talk about you," she said carefully. My heart tightened, although I tried not to show it. "What do you mean?" Margaret hesitated for a moment. "Last month there was a charity luncheon. Ashley was there with several women from her neighborhood group. She did not realize I was sitting at the next table. I felt my hands grow still." Margaret continued in the same calm voice. She told them that setting healthy boundaries with mothers was the only way to build a strong marriage. That part made sense. Then someone asked whether Daniel's mother respected those boundaries. She paused again before looking directly into my eyes. Ashley laughed and said that you always wanted to be the most important woman in Daniel's life, and that she had spent years teaching him not to feel guilty for putting his real family first. I could not find any words. Not because I was angry, but because I genuinely did not recognize the woman she had described. That was not me. I had never asked Daniel to choose between us. I had encouraged him to spend holidays with Ashley's family. I had celebrated every milestone in their marriage. I had stepped back again and again because I believed that was what loving mothers were supposed to do. Margaret reached across the table and gently touched my hand. "I wanted to tell you sooner," she whispered. "But I hoped I had misunderstood." I looked out the cafe window at people walking along the sidewalk, each carrying shopping bags or cups of coffee, living ordinary lives completely unaware that mine had quietly shifted beneath my feet. Suddenly so many moments began fitting together. The canceled visits, the careful explanations, the growing distance. They no longer felt like random disappointments. They felt like pieces of a story I had never been allowed to read until now. For the first time, I wondered whether Daniel had been hearing a version of me that I had never spoken. That realization hurt more than any forgotten holiday because distance can often be repaired. But a false picture of someone's heart can quietly change every decision that follows. I drove home from lunch with Margaret feeling strangely peaceful. Not because the truth hurt any less, but because uncertainty had finally been replaced with clarity. For years I had searched for something I had done wrong. I had replayed conversations, questioned my own memory, and wondered whether age had simply made me too sensitive. Now I understood that I had been trying to solve the wrong problem. You cannot repair a relationship if someone else has quietly rewritten your character before you ever enter the room. That evening I picked up my phone several times, thinking about calling Daniel. Each time I set it back down. I imagined explaining everything Margaret had told me. I imagined asking whether he truly believed I had spent years competing with his wife. But another thought stopped me. If he believed that version of me without ever asking if it was true, no conversation started in frustration would change his heart. For the first time in my life, I decided not to chase after someone I loved. The next Wednesday arrived, the evening when I had once waited for Daniel's familiar phone call during his drive home from work. My phone remained silent. Instead of staring at it, I walked to the community center 2 miles from my house and joined a watercolor painting class that Margaret had been encouraging me to try for months. I had not held a paintbrush since Emily and I painted flowers together years earlier. My first attempt was clumsy, the colors blending together in ways I had not intended, but I found myself smiling anyway. The following week I volunteered at the local library, helping children choose books for the summer reading program. One little boy proudly carried home a stack of adventure novels that reminded me so much of Daniel at the same age that I nearly laughed aloud. Instead of feeling sad, I felt grateful that I still had something meaningful to give the world. Slowly my calendar began filling with people who were genuinely happy to see me. I started walking every morning with Margaret through the neighborhood park. I planted tomatoes, basil, and lavender in the small garden behind my house. I attended church more regularly and accepted invitations I would once have declined because I had always been waiting for my family to call. Somewhere along the way, I realized that I had quietly put my own life on hold for years without noticing it. I never stopped loving Daniel. Not for one moment. But I stopped measuring my worth by whether my phone rang. Weeks passed before I received a text from him asking if everything was all right because he had not heard from me lately. I smiled gently when I read those words. He had not noticed the dozens of unanswered hopes that came before my silence, but he noticed the silence itself. I replied simply that I was doing well and had been keeping busy. It was the truth. For the first time in a very long time, it really was the truth. What I did not know then was that my absence had created something unexpected inside Daniel's home. The person who had always reached out first was suddenly no longer reaching. The mother who had always filled every quiet space with patience had stepped back. And sometimes it is only when a familiar light disappears that people finally realize how much they depended on its warmth. Nearly 2 months passed before anything changed, and by then I had stopped expecting it to. My days had found a comfortable rhythm. Tuesday mornings belonged to the library. Thursday afternoons belonged to my painting class. Saturday breakfasts belonged to Margaret and me, where we solved none of the world's problems but laughed as though we had. I still thought about Daniel every day, but those thoughts no longer carried the same weight. They felt more like quiet prayers than unanswered questions. Then one rainy Friday afternoon my phone rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. For a moment I simply stared at it. I answered with the same calm voice I would have used on any other day. He sounded distracted. "Mom," he said. "Can I ask you something?" There was a hesitation I had not heard in years. He explained that he had been searching for an old warranty document in a desk drawer when he found a stack of unopened envelopes addressed to me. They were birthday cards, Christmas cards, and handwritten notes I had mailed over the past 3 years. None of them had ever reached him. I closed my eyes without speaking. Daniel continued, almost talking to himself. Ashley had always told him that I preferred sending short text messages because I disliked writing long letters. Yet there they were, dozens of carefully written cards with my familiar handwriting. He had opened one by accident, believing it was something unrelated. Inside was a Christmas letter thanking him for inviting me to a holiday dinner that had never actually happened. I had written that I understood how busy young families became and that I loved them all very much. Daniel whispered, Mom, I never saw this. Before I could answer, he told me something else. While looking through an old email account he rarely used, he discovered several invitations I had sent over the years asking whether the family would like to come for Sunday dinner or spend an afternoon together at my house. Every single message had already been marked as read before he ever logged into the account. Ashley had managed most of their shared household technology because she enjoyed organizing everything. Daniel said he could not explain how it had happened, but suddenly years of missing conversations no longer made sense. He remembered birthdays he believed I had forgotten, invitations he assumed I had declined, and holidays when Ashley had quietly assured him that I wanted time alone. Piece by piece, those memories began shifting into a different picture. His voice grew quieter with every sentence. I thought you stopped trying, he admitted. Now I am wondering if you never stopped at all. I did not rush to answer because I knew this moment did not need anger. It needed honesty. I simply told him that I had always hoped there would be another chance to spend time together. But after enough unanswered invitations, I believed he had chosen a different path. There was a long silence between us. Finally, he asked the question that broke my heart more than anything else. Mom, have I really been that far away? I looked out my window as rain slid gently across the glass. Distance is not measured in miles, Daniel, I said softly. Sometimes it is measured by all the conversations that never happen. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. For the first time in many years, the silence between us no longer felt empty. It felt like the beginning of someone finally searching for the truth, instead of accepting the story they had always been told. Daniel came to my house on a quiet Sunday morning carrying nothing except a small box of old letters and a look I had never seen on his face before. He stood on my front porch for several seconds before I opened the door, as though he was trying to find the right words to bridge years of silence. When our eyes met, he did not begin with an explanation. He simply said, Mom, I am so sorry. Those 4 words carried more weight than any speech he could have prepared. We sat at my kitchen table where he had once finished homework while I baked chocolate chip cookies after school. The room had changed very little over the years. The same clock still ticked on the wall. The same sunlight spilled through the window onto the wooden table. Only we had changed. Daniel carefully placed the stack of unopened cards between us. I read every one of them, he whispered. I kept asking myself how I could have believed you stopped caring when every page was filled with love. I reached across the table and rested my hand over his. Love does not disappear because it goes unanswered, I said quietly. Sometimes it simply learns to wait. Tears filled his eyes as he admitted that he had trusted assumptions instead of conversations. He confessed that whenever Ashley explained another missed invitation or another canceled visit, he accepted her words without ever calling me himself. He had believed he was protecting his marriage by avoiding conflict, never realizing that silence can slowly become its own kind of distance. I did not ask him to choose sides. I did not ask for details about the conversations taking place inside his home. Some questions no longer mattered. The truth had already found its way into the light. What mattered was the choice standing before him now. Can you forgive me? He asked softly. I smiled, not because the pain had disappeared, but because carrying it any longer would only steal more years from both of us. I forgave you long before you knew you needed forgiveness, I answered. That is what mothers often do. But forgiveness does not erase the lessons we learn. He nodded slowly, understanding that rebuilding trust would take patience rather than promises. Before he left, he asked whether I would come to dinner the following weekend. I thanked him, then surprised both of us by saying, if my painting class finishes in time, I would love to. For the first time, I did not rearrange my entire life around a single invitation. I had finally built a life that included my family instead of depending entirely upon them. As Daniel walked back to his car, I realized something that had taken me years to understand. No one had truly taken my place. A mother's place is not a chair at a holiday table, a photograph on a social media page, or even a title spoken aloud in front of strangers. It is built through countless ordinary moments of love that cannot be erased by misunderstanding or replaced by comparison. Someone may temporarily stand where you once stood, but they cannot rewrite the years of sacrifice, comfort, guidance, and unconditional care that shaped a child's heart. Those memories remain, even when they are buried beneath silence for a while. I watched my son drive away knowing our relationship would never return to exactly what it had been. And strangely, I was at peace with that. We were not going backward. We were moving forward with honesty instead of assumptions. Sometimes the greatest victory is not reclaiming the place you once held. It is discovering that your true worth was never something another person had the power to steal.